weekly chairman's update from the WAGOP headquarters in Bellevue. It's been a busy week since my last update. 1 week ago today, on Monday, January 20th, Donald Trump was inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States. I was lucky to be back there for the inauguration in D.C. Went back for a couple of days. It was great. It was great to be there. The energy was off the charts. People were really excited and happy and upbeat about restoring common sense and constitutional values in our federal government. As you may have heard by now, the actual swearing-in ceremony was moved from the traditional outdoors on the steps of the U.S. Capitol to inside the Capitol Rotunda, partly because the weather was very cold, but also there was some talk of security concerns. Certainly, there have been attempts on the president's life, and the Secret Service wanted to be absolutely safe and secure during the swearing-in. It ended up going without any hitches, very smoothly. There was the peaceful transfer of power, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, our president and vice president. The Republican National Committee had its business meeting just before the inauguration, and Michael Whatley out of North Carolina was reelected as RNC chairman. Whatley's done great work there and immediately turned his focus to the congressional and, in many states, legislative races coming up in 2026. He is determined that the Republican Party will pick up seats in Congress in 2026, and Washington State is part of that plan, where, as you may have heard already, the RNC is targeting at least 2 Congress seats here in Washington at the end of next year. More on that later. I do want to say that there was a large contingent of people from Washington in D.C. for the inauguration, some 200 plus people, Washingtonians there in the other Washington, to watch Trump and Vance get sworn in. There were, of course, inaugural balls, there were rallies and watch parties. It was all kinds of festivities. Some of the people who were there are Washingtonians who we hope are going to end up having positions in the new Trump administration. I'll talk more about those later too, but a few names you'll recognize. The former legislator Kelly Chambers is one that we hope will be joining the Trump administration, as well as from the Tri-Cities, Mayor Pete Serrano, who was our candidate for state attorney general recently. We hope will be joining the Trump administration too. Early days on these things, but the party is supporting those two and others who are seeking positions within the Trump administration. So it was a great time to be back there. And the energy, I just want to repeat, was so strong and so positive. We are looking at policy changes out of D.C. that will help us here in Washington State. And let me pivot now to how that will work. We've seen already that President Trump's executive orders on immigration, on women's sports and women's activities, on really DEI and restoring efficiency to government are already having good effect here in Washington State. And we expect this to continue. Now, we always prefer that we change law and policy through the legislative process, but the previous president made so many bad executive orders that Trump will be very busy just writing those bad orders with new good orders. And this is a good thing to see. Already there are good effects. Federal immigration and law enforcement authorities at the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, have already started arresting illegal immigrants in Washington State who are criminals, who have committed horrific crimes, child rape, drug dealing, various gang-related activities. So ICE is already cleaning up the streets here in Washington of hardened criminals. Now, you're going to hear a lot of people on the left in Olympia and in Seattle screaming and yelling and hooping and hollering that this is somehow not in line with Washington values. That isn't true. Enforcing the law is very much in line with Washington values. And I expect to see ICE more effectively getting hardened criminals, violent criminals who are illegal immigrants to the United States in Washington state out, deported back to where they came from. And that's a good thing. Right now, the challenge, though, is in Washington state, we have all of these corkscrew sanctuary state policies, driven a little bit by law, but mostly by governors' executive orders. And this prevents ICE and other federal law enforcement agents from getting into our jails and prisons to find illegal immigrants in jails, in prisons here in Washington, and deporting them. These are people who have been convicted of crimes. They should be deported. Now, again, the left wing in Olympia and Seattle, they're going to say that immigration authorities are going into K-12 schools and deporting children and breaking up families. That is not true. I've spoken with immigration authorities here in Washington and back in D.C., the other Washington, and raiding schools is not part of their priority list. That is not part of their strategy. What ICE wants to do is find violent criminals, hardened criminals who are illegal immigrants, and focus on deporting them. That's what they should be doing. So don't be distracted by this virtue signaling and political grandstanding about breaking up families. That's not what enforcing immigration law means. There are other things that are happening in Olympia that are worth note. The progressive left in Olympia is so crazy, fixated on Donald Trump and his administration in D.C. that they are doing things here that are unconstitutional and not in line with our values as Washington state and as Washingtonians. Just last Friday in Olympia, the Speaker of the House crammed through the legislature a change in rules that will severely limit floor debate in the legislature in Olympia. This is a terrible idea. Since 1893, for some 130 years, Washington state legislature has had a policy, a rule of allowing open and free debate on bills, on budgets, on points in public policy on the floor of the legislature. This is what the floor of the legislature is for. And the progressive left wants to stop that debate, restrict and limit that debate. I spoke out against it on the floor of the House Friday night and was immediately gavelled. That is almost an example in itself of how the progressive left wants to limit conversation and debate. Conversation and debate is essential. It's a part of free speech. It's a part of representative government. And it's a learning mechanism. I've had so many people approach me in the store or at public events saying that they learned about tax policy, they learned about crime fighting and public safety, they learned about K-12 education reform from watching floor debates. And that is the purpose of our open representative government. Restricting those floor debates is a terrible thing. The point is, with a new administration in D.C. making good reforms to law enforcement, public safety, education, government efficiency, we are going to see the progressive left here in Washington get angrier and angrier, get more reactive and more reactive. We have to continue to speak truth to power, to be transparent and open, to engage with the public, talking about what's good in Washington. As you've heard me say before, we have a beautiful place in this world to live. We need to make sure our neighborhoods are safe. We need to make sure our schools are giving the kids the high quality basic education that the state constitution calls for them to have. We need to make sure that our budgets are rational and not growing faster than the general economy. And we will do all of these things in the current legislative session in Olympia and back east with the new Congress and the new administration in the White House. We're at a turning point for this country, a good one, where things are getting better. And we're going to make sure, as the Washington State Republican Party, that we make things better here in Washington, we fix what's broken, and we support the good things that the Trump administration is doing in D.C. and that we can do here in our Washington. That's it for this week. I'll talk to you again soon. In the meantime, stay strong and be well.